Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to be there today to engage in this very important conversation around fragile health. It's a great privilege to be part of it, albeit digitally. I'm going to be talking about how to engage with members of your community who are reluctant to speak about their emotional and mental health challenges. Members of the community I represent are the African and African Caribbean community, and all of the sort of issues that affect our mental health. I think it's important to start with a personal story. I came here over 33 years ago as a student, and there were the usual culture shock, there were the usual language barrier, even though I spoke the English language, but there were still ways that the English language is spoken here that is still different from the English language we had to learn growing up in Nigeria. I had to cross those challenges, cross those bridges to make sure that I'm able to understand, articulate myself when I'm making conversations with people. There's also the cultural sort of differences. And I think most importantly, something that people tend to forget is the fact that most of us that have come from the global south, what we today call the global majority, we usually come from a collectivist society, from a collectivist culture, where your neighbor is your brother, your neighbor is your sister, you're a member of a village that is involved in your nuclear family. But we come straight into a culture that is an individualistic one. That shock in itself, if not managed properly, becomes an issue that then creates trauma. I'll tell you a personal story. I came here in my early 20s, and I remember coming from a culture that celebrates Christmas in a very loud, very colorful, very joyful way. We celebrate it in a very joyful way. We celebrate from the 24th right up to the 2nd of January. I was on my own. I stayed in my room and I spent Christmas, and I think it was about 3 Christmases, 3 years running, on my own, eating leftover Chinese food. I cried my eyes out for those period. I was by myself. Members of my family were not with me. I didn't have, at that time, there were no sort of phone systems that you can phone your family and have conversations and even do image sort of viewing. Those were very traumatic times in my life. And there's also the issue around discrimination, prejudice, and racism, both in school and at work. I finished school, I finished work, and I had to go home by myself. I had no community around me, something that I have been used to. And that in itself is another trauma-inducing scenario that I had to bottle up. Coupled with the fact that as men in my culture, and I think in most cultures, what happens is that boys are raised not to show emotions. It is a sign of weakness, not to express ourselves in an emotional way. We are being raised to be providers, we are being raised to be protectors of our family and of our community. Some of us have the natural ability to be able to do all of these things. Not all men do. And for those men that struggle of not having the affinity to be protectors and providers, they suffer some serious emotional issues, serious emotional trauma. That trauma that I had, and to some instances I still carry with me, resulted in me having high blood pressure. And that means I have to continue to take medication of some in one dose or the other for the rest of my life to keep that managed. And also, all of this different situation that members of my community come to meet in this society then makes it difficult for them to be able to interact with other people. We know the issues around law enforcement and how people from my community have had very poor relationships with them. So in other words, people of authority we've had issues around that sort of area, and that has been difficult in itself. But I think the most important thing for us in my community, and the one that I now, with the whole huge pile of privilege, support and try my best to help them in one way or the other using the tool of the African families in the UK CIC, is the fact that our people do not have the confidence to engage. The confidence to engage with service providers. The confidence to engage in such a way that the service providers understand the specific needs of these individuals. And that is why organizations like my own, and I'm sure like my colleagues are going to explain, is a situation of where we have to provide those support systems for men, particularly men of African origin and men of Caribbean origin. It is an ongoing process. It is not something that is being solved as we speak. Obviously, with VICAS and this fragile strength program that I am so happy to be a part of, that process of us trying to understand how men manage their mental well-being is so important. Another aspect again is relationships. How do we cope with relationships? How do we understand relationship from the point of view of an individualistic society? Understand it in such a way that we can thrive, making sure that happens. And I know the stories around, people from my community facing all of those challenges. One of the things that the Mental Health Foundation said that part of the reason for mental health issues for men from my community is racism and discrimination. Racism and discrimination. And these are trauma-inducing events in our lives. And because of the way it happens, we don't have the confidence to engage with the service providers to help us manage that. And that is why, at the risk of repeating myself, we have events like this. We have other groups that are now looking after men and helping them manage their mental well-being. One of the things that I use to speak to people in my community that are reluctant to engage for whatever reason is to first and foremost use the benefit of stories, creating a safe space that we can come and sit down, have a conversation in a way that is not going to be judgmental. Each and every one of us have stories to share. There was a situation where we had a safe space where a young man from South Sudan told us stories about his journey on the Sahara Desert and on the Mediterranean Sea. It was a jaw-dropping moment. You could hear a pin drop. And after he told the story, all of us walked up to him, shook his hands, gave him a hug, a big group hug. And you can see the relief leaving his body of having expressed and told that story. And there are many levels of this happening. And we try our best to make sure we create that. On an individual basis, this is the advice that I give them. I created an acronym, EAT, EAT. The E stands for an evaluation of your situation, evaluation of your feelings. How do you feel? Are you angry? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you frustrated? Are you worried? You know, we need to be able to do that honest self-evaluation of how we are actually feeling inside of ourselves. And after you make that honest evaluation about how you are feeling, you then acknowledge that that is where you are. Acknowledge that crying in a trauma-induced situation is not weakness. It's an acknowledgement of how you are feeling. Expressing feelings of anger is not a disturbing situation. It is an expression of how you feel. Expressing joy is also not something that is feminine. It is masculine too, to express joy. So there must be an acknowledgement of how you are feeling. And I say this all the time to young black men and men of my age that struggle with mental health, that it is important for you to do that self-evaluation, to also acknowledge the self and honest evaluation that you have carried out. And the third thing is the T. Because when you have evaluated how you feel, you have acknowledged that that is exactly how you feel, then you can look for the tools. The tools that you would help to tackle whatever situation that you are going through. When you have those tools to deal with those situations, and the tools might mean which group do you belong to? Who can you speak to? Who has the expertise to deal with the type of trauma that you are going through? Who has the expertise to deal with the type of situations that you have found yourself? Who can you speak to? Who can you talk to? What is the first step towards resolving issues around your mental health? But those things are not possible without you having an evaluation of how you're feeling, accepting, acknowledging that that is how you feel, and look for the tools to be able to do it. There's no major way of tackling the issues, but I think that it must start with a story. You know, I'm somebody who is a student of Stoicism. And Stoicism in Plato says that he who tells the stories is the one that rules society. When you are able to tell your story, you are able to make the changes that is required. You are able to change the views of the people who are around you. And one of the things I say about one of the greatest human beings that ever lived, Madiba, Nelson Mandela, he said, education is the weapon with which we can change the world. When we begin to educate men about their mental well-being, it's as important as their physical well-being. Their mental well-being is as important as their jobs. Their mental well-being affects their relationship. Their mental well-being affects their output at work. Their mental well-being affects their masculinity. Remember, evaluate, acknowledge, and find the tools. Unfortunately, I cannot be there today, but it has been a joy to be able to present this to you. God bless. Thank you.